The metallic click echoes through the turret. A 76mm armor-piercing round slides into the breech. Through the periscope, you watch the massive silhouette emerge from the tree line. A Panther, sloped armor, high-velocity gun, the tank every German crew trusted to dominate the battlefield. The same tank whose crews called your Sherman a tin can, a nickname spoken with contempt by men who believed their technological superiority made them invincible. But that was before July 1944, when the first Sherman tanks mounting this longer, deadlier gun began arriving in France. Before German tankers discovered that American engineering had quietly closed the gap they thought would last forever. The story of how a single-caliber upgrade shattered German confidence reveals a profound truth about warfare. Superiority is temporary, and arrogance is deadly. July 25th, 1944. The second day of Operation Cobra. American forces prepare to break out from the Normandy hedgerows that have trapped them for 7 weeks. Among the assault units, something new rolls forward: 102 M4A1 Sherman tanks mounting 76mm guns. These are not the stubby-barreled 75mm Shermans that German tankers had learned to dismiss. These carry weapons with 52 calibers of length, firing armor-piercing rounds at 2,600 feet per second. Higher velocity, better penetration. A game-changer. But to understand why this mattered so desperately, you must first understand what American tank crews had endured in the weeks since D-Day, June 6, 1944. Not a single Sherman with a 76mm gun landed on the Normandy beaches. Every medium tank that rolled off the landing craft carried the standard 75mm M3 gun, a weapon designed primarily for infantry support, not tank combat. At ranges beyond 1,000 meters, this gun could not penetrate the frontal armor of a Panzer IV. Against a Panther, the situation was catastrophic. The 75mm round bounced off Panther frontal armor at virtually any range. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. American intelligence had warned that Panthers would be encountered in Normandy, but commanders believed they would be rare. The assumption proved devastatingly wrong. 38% of German tanks in Normandy were Panthers. Nearly 4 out of every 10 German tanks American crews faced possessed frontal armor. Their guns could not penetrate. The German Panther mounted a 75mm KWK 42 liters, 70 gun, a high-velocity weapon that could penetrate Sherman armor from 2,000 meters away. Its frontal glacis armor measured 80mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees, providing effective protection equivalent to 139mm. The turret front was 100mm thick. This combination of gun and armor made the Panther dominant in long-range engagements. German tank crews knew these statistics. They had been told their Panthers were technologically superior. Training emphasized the Panther's advantages. Propaganda films showed Panthers destroying Shermans with ease. This created a psychological framework. German tankers believed they were fighting from a position of overwhelming technical superiority. Lieutenant Colonel William B. Lovelady, commander of the 3rd Armored Division's 2nd Battalion, experienced this disparity firsthand. One of his Shermans turned the corner of a house and fired 3 shots at the front of a Panther. All 3 rounds bounced off. The Sherman backed behind the corner. A Panther round penetrated 2 sides of the house, plus the tank's armor, disabling it completely. This pattern repeated across Normandy. American tank crews developed tactics to compensate for their disadvantage. They used terrain for cover. They maneuvered to attack from the flanks where Panther armor was thinner. They called for artillery support. They coordinated with tank destroyers equipped with 3-inch guns. But these tactics required getting close, dangerously close, and German guns had first-shot advantage at range. The psychological impact on American tank crews was severe. Men climbed into vehicles they knew were outgunned. They understood that in a frontal engagement at long range, they would likely die before their shots could be effective. Some crews nicknamed their Shermans Ronsons after the cigarette lighter light's first time, every time. The Sherman's gasoline engine and ammunition storage made fire a constant fear. Between June and early July 1944, complaints from frontline tank commanders reached General Eisenhower with increasing urgency. On July 2nd, Eisenhower relayed these complaints to Ordnance. The message was clear. The 75mm gun was inadequate against German armor encountered in combat. Something had to be done immediately. On July 12th, a board convened to determine what weapons available could defeat the Panther. Engineers conducted tests. They fired American tank guns and anti-tank weapons at captured Panther armor plates. The results were sobering. None of the standard U.S. weapons could penetrate Panther frontal armor reliably. The 3-inch gun on the M10 tank destroyer could penetrate the Panther's gun mantlet, but only from 200 yards away, well within the range where the Panther's gun would be devastating. But there was one option available that hadn't been considered. The 76mm M1 gun, already in production, already mounted on some Shermans, sitting in Britain waiting for deployment. The 76mm gun had been developed starting in July 1942. The Ordnance Department recognized that eventually American tanks would need better anti-armor capability, but the gun faced resistance. It required a larger turret. The T-23 tank turret was adapted for the Sherman. It had worse high-explosive performance than the 75mm gun. The 76mm high-explosive shell contained only 0.8 to 6 pounds of explosive filler compared to 1.4 to 7 pounds in the 75mm shell. This meant less effectiveness against infantry and fortifications. American doctrine emphasized that tanks primarily fought infantry, not other tanks. Tank versus tank combat was classified as special operations in Army field manuals, receiving less than 1 page of coverage. The 75mm gun excelled at its primary mission. Commanders were reluctant to trade proven high-explosive effectiveness for improved but unproven anti-armor capability. The first batch of 130 M4A 176mm Shermans arrived in Britain on April 10, 1944, 2 months before D-Day. They sat unused. Major General Hugh Gaffey of the 2nd Armoured Division argued against deploying them. His reasoning seemed sound at the time. There were too few available. Troops weren't properly trained on the new gun. Logistics would become complicated, supplying 2 different types of ammunition. On June 12th, an attempt to interest 3rd Army in the new tanks failed. A report stated, all of the commanders were reluctant to see it take the place of the 75mm tank gun in any quantity. This reluctance was based on experience. American tankers in North Africa and Italy had successfully fought German tanks with 75mm guns. Tiger tanks had been handled since Tunisia. The belief persisted that existing weapons were adequate. What commanders didn't fully grasp was how much German armor had improved. The Panther, introduced in 1943, represented a quantum leap in German tank design, a direct response to encountering Soviet T-34 tanks on the Eastern Front. But combat experience in Normandy rapidly changed minds. Within weeks of the invasion, it became clear that the 75mm gun was catastrophically inadequate against Panthers. Tank crews were dying. Units were suffering losses they couldn't sustain. The urgent requests from frontline commanders could no longer be ignored. General Bradley of 1st U.S. Army ordered as many 76mm Shermans as possible sent to France for Operation Cobra, the planned breakout from Normandy. 102 M4 176mm tanks arrived in France. They entered combat on July 25, 1944. The 76mm gun fired the M62A1 armor-piercing capped round at a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second. This was a significant improvement over the 75mm gun's performance, but there was a critical limitation. Even the 76mm gun could not reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. At 1,000 meters, the M62A1 round could penetrate 109mm of armor at 0 degrees obliquity. The Panther's frontal glacis, with its effective thickness of 139mm due to slope, remained largely invulnerable. However, the 76mm gun could engage and destroy Panzer IV tanks, the most numerous German tank, at reasonable combat ranges. It could penetrate Panther side armor. It could penetrate the Panther's turret mantlet at closer ranges. Most importantly, it restored American tank crews' confidence. They now had a weapon that gave them a fighting chance. But the real transformation came in August 1944, when a new type of ammunition began arriving in Europe. The M93 high-velocity armor-piercing round, universally known as HVAP, represented a completely different approach to defeating armor. Instead of a solid steel projectile, the HVAP round used a tungsten carbide core surrounded by an aluminum body. The lighter aluminum sabot fell away after leaving the barrel, while the dense tungsten core maintained velocity. This gave the round a muzzle velocity of 3,400 feet per second, nearly 800 feet per second faster than standard ammunition. At 1,000 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 178 millimeters of armor. This was enough to penetrate Panther turret mantlets at ranges up to 1,000 yards. For the first time, American tank crews had ammunition that could defeat Panthers frontally at combat ranges. The Ordnance Department had been testing HVAP projectiles since spring 1942, but tungsten was scarce. Imported from China, it was needed for machine tools and other critical applications. Not until after Normandy did the US recognize the urgent need for better anti-armor ammunition. Development accelerated. The first 1,000 HVAP rounds were produced in July 1944. 2,000 arrived by air in August. Production ramped up. 1,000 rounds in September, 5,000 in November, 6,000 in February 1945. But there was never enough. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman had received only 5 HVAP rounds, total 1 round per month. These precious rounds were rationed carefully. Tank destroyers received priority. Tank crews were instructed to use standard ammunition unless absolutely necessary. HVAP was reserved for Panthers and Tigers targets that required it. This scarcity meant that even with superior ammunition available, American tank crews couldn't rely on it. They had to assume they would engage German armor with standard M62A1 rounds. Tactics and training emphasized flanking attacks, combined arms coordination, and using terrain advantage. The 76mm gun with HVAP ammunition was a capability, not a solution. Meanwhile, German tank crews maintained their confidence. Panthers continued to dominate long-range engagements. German propaganda emphasized technical superiority. Tank commanders were told that one Panther could defeat 5 Shermans. This wasn't mere boasting in frontal engagements at long range. This kill ratio was often accurate. But German tankers were about to discover that American engineering and industrial capacity could adapt faster than they imagined, and that their contempt for the tin can Sherman was about to become a fatal miscalculation. September 18, 1944. The rolling hills of Lorraine, near the town of Arrogance. German 5th Panzer Army prepared a counter-offensive to halt Patton's Third Army advance toward the Rhine. The German force consisted of 107 Panther tanks and 75 Panzer IVs, supported by 80 assault guns, 262 armoured vehicles total. These were organised into 2 Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th Panzer brigades, along with elements of the 11th Panzer Division. The German commanders expected quick victory. They had numerical superiority in the sector. More importantly, they had Panther's tanks they believed were invincible against Sherman opposition. The plan was straightforward: recapture Lunéville, eliminate the US, a 12-core bridgehead over the Moselle River at Dieulouard, and throw American forces back. Opposing this German armoured spearhead was Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division, one of the most experienced American armoured units in Europe. CCA held a thinly stretched salient around Arrogance, using an extended outpost line of armoured infantry and engineers, supported by tanks, tank destroyers, and artillery. But Combat Command A had something the Germans hadn't fully accounted for: a mix of 75mm and 76mm Shermans, experienced crews who had fought since Normandy, excellent artillery and support, and commanders who understood how to use terrain defensively. The two German panzer brigades that attacked at Arrowcourt were newly formed. Most crews had minimal combat experience. Training had been rushed. Fuel shortages meant they had conducted fewer exercises than doctrine required. German tactical doctrine at this point in the war had deteriorated significantly. Earlier in the war, German tankers were trained to scout ahead, identify enemy positions, and attack with coordinated combined arms. But by late 1944, personnel quality had declined, training time had shortened, and doctrine had simplified to the point where units were expected to simply advance and rely on technical superiority. This proved catastrophic at Arrowcourt. September 19th, 1944, 0800 hours. Heavy fog blanketed the battlefield. Company-sized elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated CCA outposts on the east and south faces of the American salient. Two U.S. tank destroyer platoons and a medium tank company engaged the Panthers in a running fight that extended all the way to CCA's headquarters area. The Germans advanced blindly through the fog. They had no integral scouting units. They couldn't see American positions until they were dangerously close. This negated the Panthers' primary advantage, long-range firepower. In the fog, engagements happened at close range where Sherman guns could penetrate Panther side armor. Poor German tactical deployment exposed their weaker side armor to waiting Shermans. American crews used the fog as cover, flanking Panthers and knocking them out before German crews could react. The Panthers' superior frontal armor meant nothing when American tanks were shooting at their sides. By midday, 11 Panthers had been destroyed. As the fog lifted around noon, American artillery observer pilots took to the air. Major Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, flying a Piper L-4 Cub light observation aircraft armed with bazooka rockets, spotted a company of Panthers advancing toward Arrowcourt. Carpenter dove through German ground fire, making repeated attack runs, firing all his rockets at the advancing tanks. While his rockets caused minimal damage, his spotting allowed American artillery to engage the German column accurately. The coordination between American forces was devastating. Tank crews engaged at close range. Tank destroyers moved to flanking positions. Artillery pounded German assembly areas. Fighter bombers struck when the weather cleared. This combined arms approach overwhelmed German advantages in individual tank capability. From September 20th to 25th, 5th Panzer Army ordered repeated attacks against Arrowcourt. Each attack failed with heavy German losses. Panthers moved toward American positions, only to be engaged by dug-in Shermans, tank destroyers, and direct-fire artillery. German tanks that survived American tank fire were destroyed by artillery or air strikes. The psychological impact on German crews was severe. They had been told Panthers were superior. They expected Sherman crews to retreat when faced with Panthers. Instead, Shermans held positions and fought aggressively. German tank commanders discovered that at the ranges where combat actually occurred, often under 1,000 meters due to terrain, American 76mm guns could penetrate their armor. Captain Jimmy Leach of B Company, 37th Tank Battalion, led his Shermans in one engagement where his orders were simple. Mount tanks now. I want you to move guns ablazing in line formation, with all guns ablazing. Leach's company attacked a Panther force that had penetrated American positions. The aggressive assault, with all guns firing, overwhelmed the German tanks. According to Leach's report, they abandoned the battlefield. They put those things in high gear, those Panther tanks, and they took off over a hill and disappeared. This was unprecedented. Panthers retreating from Shermans, German crews abandoning the fight not because they were destroyed, but because they were psychologically defeated by American aggressiveness and firepower. The statistics from Arrowcourt told the story definitively. Over 11 days of battle, Combat Command A reported destroying 86 German tanks, CCA's losses were 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers destroyed. The kill ratio favoured the Americans by more than 3-1, despite German technical superiority in tank design. General Patton visited Arrogance during the battle. After reviewing the engagement, he remarked that 43 enemy tanks, mostly factory new Panthers, had been destroyed with only 6 Americans killed and 13 wounded. The American forces had not just won, they had dominated. For German tankers, Arrogance shattered the myth of Panther invincibility. Reports filtered back to German armoured units across the front. American Shermans, including models with 76mm guns, had destroyed Panthers in large numbers. The contemptuous nickname Tin Can suddenly seemed less appropriate. German after-action reports from Arrogance noted several factors that contributed to their defeat. Inexperienced crews, poor scouting, inadequate combined arms coordination, American artillery superiority, and American air superiority. But one factor received less emphasis in German reports yet was obvious to the tank crews who survived. American tank guns had become significantly more effective. The 76mm gun, especially when firing HVAP ammunition, could defeat Panthers. German crews could no longer assume frontal armour would protect them. They could no longer casually dismiss Sherman tanks as inferior. The technological advantage they had relied upon was eroding. But the true transformation in German attitudes came not from a single battle, but from accumulated combat experience across the European theatre through late 1944. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. October 1944. German tank crews across the Western Front began comparing notes. Reports from Arrogance had circulated. Other engagements reinforced the pattern. The Sherman was no longer the easy target it had been in June. Something had changed, and German tankers were struggling to understand what. The technical intelligence reports German commanders received painted a concerning picture. American industry had upgraded Sherman armament. The new 76mm gun appeared with increasing frequency. More troubling were reports of a new type of American ammunition tungsten cord rounds that could penetrate Panther armor at ranges previously thought safe. German Panzer crews began modifying their tactics. Where they had previously advanced confidently, expecting their armor to protect them, they now approached American positions more cautiously. The psychological advantage they had enjoyed since encountering Shermans in Normandy was dissipating. Tank commanders who survived combat with 76mm Shermans spread the word. These were not the same tanks they had faced in June. The German perspective on American armor evolved through the fall of 1944. Early in the Normandy campaign, German tankers genuinely believed Shermans were inferior in every meaningful way. This belief was reinforced by propaganda, by their own combat experiences, and by the technical specifications they knew. But actual combat results began contradicting these assumptions. Captured German documents from late 1944 reveal a shift in tone. Where earlier assessments dismissed American tanks as poorly armoured and undergunned, later reports acknowledged that Sherman units were defeating Panther formations through superior tactics, better combined arms, integration, and increasingly adequate firepower. The word adequate represented a significant change. German commanders were implicitly acknowledging that American guns could now threaten their armour. But many German tankers still clung to the belief that their Panthers were superior. This cognitive dissonance, knowing that Shermans were winning engagements while believing Panthers were better, created confusion and demoralization. Tank crews couldn't reconcile what they had been told with what they were experiencing. Some German commanders understood the situation more clearly. They recognized that tank versus tank combat was only one aspect of armored warfare. American superiority in artillery, air support, logistics, and crew training meant that even with technically superior tanks, German units were losing battles. But this understanding didn't filter down to every tank crew. Many German tankers continued to blame their losses on factors other than American: capability, poor leadership, fuel shortages, numerical disadvantage, anything except the possibility that American tanks had become genuinely dangerous opponents. The Battle of the Bulge would force a final reckoning with reality. December 16, 1944. German forces launched their last major offensive in the West Operation Wacht am Rhein, known to the Allies as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler committed his remaining armoured reserves to this desperate gamble. Among the attacking forces were approximately 1,500 tanks and assault guns, including substantial numbers of Panthers and Tigers. By this point in the war, American armoured divisions had received significant numbers of 76mm Shermans. Approximately 25% of American medium tanks in Europe carried the upgraded gun. More importantly, crews were now trained on the weapon, ammunition supply had improved, and tactical doctrine had evolved to leverage the gun's capabilities. The German offensive achieved initial surprise and made significant gains in the first days. But as American forces recovered and counterattacked, tank engagements throughout the Ardennes demonstrated how much had changed since Normandy. At Pufendorf on November 17, 1944, just before the Bulge, 2nd Armoured Division fought what veterans called the biggest tank battle in 2nd Armoured experience. The engagement was tank against tank, with infantry on both sides pinned down by artillery. German forces had superior positions on high ground. Shermans attacking uphill should have been slaughtered by Panther long-range fire. Instead, the battle turned into a brutal slugging match. American 75mm and 76mm Shermans stepped up to engage at close range, accepting casualties to close the distance where their guns could be effective. One Sherman fired 14 rounds of 76mm ammunition at a Tiger before achieving any success and was immediately destroyed by another Tiger. But American tank destroyers with 90mm guns arrived and turned the tide. The Americans took heavy losses but held their ground. This battle illustrated both the continued effectiveness of German heavy armour and the growing capability of American forces to counter it. German tanks could still win individual engagements, but American combined arms doctrine tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, air support could win battles. During the Bulge, German tank crews discovered that many American units now operated mixed formations, some 75mm Shermans for infantry support, some 76mm Shermans for anti-armour work, and tank destroyer battalions with 90mm guns for heavy targets. This combination proved tactically flexible and difficult to counter. Kampfgruppe Piper, the German armoured spearhead that penetrated deepest into American lines, included approximately 45 Panthers and King Tigers. These units initially made good progress, destroying American tanks they encountered. But as American forces rallied, Piper's force became isolated, surrounded, and ultimately destroyed not primarily by American tanks, but by fuel exhaustion, mechanical breakdowns, and artillery. Of the heavy armour Piper's force abandoned at La Glaise, several Panthers showed battle damage from 76mm hits that had penetrated. One particular Panther examined after the battle showed a 76mm HVAP round had penetrated the turret mantlet, killing the gunner and loader. The penetration hole was clean, the tungsten core had punched through armour. German crews believed was proof against Sherman guns. This physical evidence circulated among German tank units. The invulnerable Panther was a myth. American guns could kill them. German tanker accounts from late 1944 and early 1945, when they became available to historians after the war, revealed the psychological impact of this realization. One Panther commander reported that before engaging American armour, he now had to consider whether the Shermans he faced might have 76mm guns and whether they might have the special tungsten ammunition. This uncertainty, not knowing if the next engagement would be against an opponent who could kill you, eroded the confidence German crews had previously enjoyed. The nickname Tin Can disappeared from German tanker vocabulary in late 1944. In its place came more respectful assessments. Some German reports referred to the 76mm Sherman as the long gun Sherman, or simply acknowledged it as a dangerous opponent. The contempt was gone. But this shift in German attitudes came too late to change the course of the war. By early 1945, German armor was in terminal decline, not because American tanks had become superior, but because the entire German military system was collapsing. The production statistics told an unforgiving story. In 1944, Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panther tanks. The United States produced approximately 29,000 medium tanks in the same period, most of them Shermans. By early 1945, German tank production was declining rapidly as Allied bombing destroyed factories and disrupted supply chains. American production continued at high levels. More critically, German tanks that were destroyed could not be replaced. Experienced crews killed in action could not be replaced with equally skilled veterans. There were none left. Fuel shortages meant that tanks reaching frontline units often couldn't be used operationally. Spare parts became unavailable. Training time for new crews was cut to the minimum, producing tankers who lacked the skills that had given Germany its early war advantages. American logistics, by contrast, kept tanks running, kept ammunition flowing, kept replacement crews arriving. A Sherman destroyed in combat could be replaced within weeks. A crew that lost their tank could be reassigned to a new vehicle. The system worked because American industry and logistics were designed to sustain mechanized warfare on a global scale. By March 1945, German armored formations existed largely on paper. Units designated as Panzer divisions had a handful of operational tanks. Fuel shortages meant these surviving tanks often couldn't move. The Panthers that German tankers had once trusted were increasingly abandoned beside roads, out of fuel, broken down, or simply left behind as units retreated. The transformation was complete. In June 1944, German tankers in Panthers looked down on Sherman crews, confident in their technical superiority. By March 1945, the surviving German tankers, those who hadn't been killed or captured, understood that tank quality alone could not win battles, and certainly could not win wars. But the historical irony goes deeper than German crews discovering American tanks had improved. The real story is that American tankers never needed Panthers to win. The Sherman, even the 75mm version, was fundamentally sound. When the 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition became available, these represented incremental improvements to an already successful weapon system, not a desperate attempt to match German superiority. American doctrine, which emphasized combined arms and viewed tanks primarily as infantry support vehicles that occasionally fought other tanks, proved more effective than German doctrine, which increasingly relied on technically sophisticated armor to compensate for declining infantry and artillery capability. The Sherman's true advantages were the ones German tankers couldn't see from their turrets: reliability, maintainability, crew survivability, and industrial sustainability. A 75mm Sherman that reached the battlefield and fought reliably was more valuable than a Panther that broke down before engaging the enemy. A tank crew that could escape a burning Sherman and be reassigned to a new vehicle contributed more to victory than a Panther crew killed when their tank was knocked out and couldn't be replaced. The German obsession with technical specifications, thicker armor, more powerful guns, heavier vehicles, reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of modern industrial warfare. Wars are not won by having the best individual weapons. Wars are won by having adequate weapons in sufficient quantities, supported by functioning logistics, operated by trained crews, employed according to sound doctrine, and integrated into a combined arms system. The 76mm Sherman with HVAP ammunition represented the American approach to warfare. Identify a problem, develop a solution, produce it in quantity, distribute it efficiently, train operators, integrate it into existing systems, and continue improving. This systematic approach defeated German technical sophistication because it was sustainable. Soviet tanker Dmitry Loza, hero of the Soviet Union, who commanded American-supplied Shermans on the Eastern Front, provided perhaps the most balanced assessment of the tank's qualities. In his memoir Commanding the Red Army's Sherman Tanks, Loza praised Sherman reliability extensively. He noted the service life of Sherman tracks exceeded 5,000 kilometers. He commended the auxiliary generator for charging batteries, eliminating the need to run the main engine. He praised American armor quality, comfortable crew stations, and general mechanical reliability. Loza and his crews received both 75mm and 76mm Shermans through Lend-Lease. Soviet units that standardized on Shermans often achieved notable success, not because Shermans were superior to T-34 85 seconds in every metric, but because they were reliable, easy to maintain, and allowed crews to focus on fighting rather than constant mechanical problems. The French army operated captured German Panthers after the war and conducted the most thorough post-war evaluation of the tank's actual capabilities. Their 1947 technical report noted that while certain Panther features were admirable, particularly the gun and optical equipment, the overall package was unsuitable for sustained military operations. Chronic mechanical failures, especially the catastrophic final drive problems that limited operational range to 150 kilometers, made the Panther fundamentally unfit for purpose. French crews who had operated both Panthers and Shermans universally preferred the Sherman for actual military service. The Panther might win individual engagements, but the Sherman would still be operational after the Panther had broken down and been abandoned. This post-war consensus among nations that evaluated both German and American tanks provides the final answer to the question of superiority. The Sherman was superior precisely because it prioritized the right factors. Not maximum gun penetration at extreme range, not maximum armor thickness in frontal engagements, but reliability, sustainability, and practical effectiveness in real combat conditions. The 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition closed the specific capability gap that German armor had exploited in Normandy. But this gap was always tactical, never strategic. Even if American tanks had never received upgraded guns, the outcome of the war would not have changed. American industrial capacity, logistics, air power, and manpower would have prevailed regardless. The German tankers who called the Sherman a tin can in June 1944 were making a fundamental error. They confused individual tank specifications with actual military effectiveness. By the time they recognized this error in late 1944 and early 1945, it was far too late. The Sherman evolved throughout the war. The M4A3E8 Easy 8 with 76mm gun, HVSS suspension, and wet ammunition storage represented the culmination of continuous improvement. This version served effectively through the end of World War II, throughout the Korean War, and with various armies into the 1970s. Israeli M51 Shermans mounting French 105mm guns fought successfully in the Yom Kippur War of 1973, nearly 30 years after the Sherman's introduction. The Panther had no such evolution. Production ended in March or April 1945. No nation adopted the Panther for post-war service once captured stocks and spare parts were exhausted. The design influenced no subsequent tank development in any meaningful way. The Panther was a dead end, impressive on paper, effective in specific tactical situations, but ultimately unsuited for the tank realities of sustained combat operations. American tankers in 1945 understood these truths from experience. They had faced Panthers in combat. They had seen Panthers abandoned by their crews due to mechanical failure. They had recovered Panthers from battlefields and examined them closely. They recognized the Panther's advantages in direct engagements, but they also recognized its fatal weaknesses in sustained operations. Colonel Creighton Abrams, commander of the 37th Tank Battalion of 4th Armored Division, fought the entire European campaign in Shermans. His tank, named Thunderbolt, was a 75mm Sherman that he used to command his battalion through France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and into Germany. Abrams went through 7 different Shermans during the war. Each time his tank was knocked out or disabled, he received a new one and continued fighting. General Patton called Abrams the world champion tank commander. At the Battle of Arrogance, Abrams's battalion lost 14 Shermans while destroying 55 Panthers and Tigers. This kill ratio achieved primarily with 75mm guns before 76mm. Models became common. demonstrated what experienced crews with sound tactics could accomplish even with technically inferior weapons. Abrams never complained about his Sherman's capabilities. He understood that in real combat, crew training, tactical skill, maintenance, and combined arms support mattered more than gun caliber or armor thickness. He and his crews trusted their Shermans because the tanks were reliable, because they could be repaired and returned to service quickly, and because the logistics system kept them supplied with ammunition and fuel. This trust, this confidence in the overall system, rather than individual weapon specifications, was something German tankers lost in 1944. As their logistics collapsed, as their fuel dried up, as their spare parts became unavailable, German crews could no longer trust that their technically superior tanks would actually function when needed. The best armor in the world provided no protection if the tank was immobilized by mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion. The psychological transformation was complete. German tankers who had mocked American tin cans in June 1944 were by March 1945 abandoning their Panthers beside roads and walking back to German lines. The contempt had been replaced by the bitter understanding that technical superiority meant nothing without the industrial and logistical capability to sustain it. The historical record is unambiguous. The Sherman won the war. Not alone, but American armored divisions equipped with Shermans spearheaded the breakout from Normandy, the drive across France, the defeat of the Bulge offensive, the crossing of the Rhine, and the conquest of Germany. They accomplished this against German forces equipped with Panthers, Tigers, King Tigers, and Jagdpanthers. German tankers who survived the war, when interviewed by historians in later decades, often acknowledged that while their tanks were technically impressive, the American system was more effective. They recognized that their contemptuous early assessments of Sherman tanks were based on incomplete understanding of how wars are actually won. The 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition were important developments that restored American tank crews' confidence and gave them tools to engage German armor more effectively. But these upgrades were responses to a tactical problem, not solutions to a strategic crisis. The Sherman would have succeeded with or without these improvements, because the Sherman was part of a war-winning system, while the Panther was an impressive component of a failing system. The lesson transcends tank design and World War II specifically. In any conflict, technical sophistication without sustainability is a liability. Impressive specifications without reliable execution produce expensive failures. Adequate capability that functions consistently defeats superior capability that functions sporadically, every time. German tankers learned this lesson the hard way, watching their vaunted Panthers break down, run out of fuel, and get abandoned while inferior American Shermans continued advancing. The contemptuous nickname tin can vanished from German vocabulary. Not because American tanks suddenly became invincible, but because German tankers realized their entire framework for evaluating effectiveness had been wrong. Victory in mechanized warfare requires more than the best individual weapons. It requires weapons that work reliably, that can be produced in adequate numbers, that can be sustained logistically, that can be operated by available personnel, and that can be employed according to effective doctrine. The Sherman succeeded on all these criteria. The Panther failed on most of them. By May 1945, American Shermans rolled through Berlin while abandoned Panthers littered the roads behind retreating German forces. The visual contrast symbolized the fundamental truth. Sustainability wins wars, not specifications. The German tankers, who had called Shermans tin cans, learned this truth too late to matter. The final irony is that American tankers never needed German approval or respect. They needed tanks that worked, ammunition that arrived, fuel that flowed, and logistics that functioned. They had all of these things. German tankers, for all their technical sophistication, ultimately had none of them. And that made all the difference. The Sherman's 76mm gun and HVAP ammunition were excellent developments that improved American armor's effectiveness against German heavy tanks. But they were refinements to an already successful weapon system, not desperate attempts to achieve parity with superior German technology. The Sherman was never inferior where it mattered most, in actual combat effectiveness within a functioning military system. German tankers who dismissed Shermans as tin cans in 1944 were making a prediction that history thoroughly disproved. The Sherman, in its various versions, remained in service with armies worldwide for decades. The Panther disappeared within months of the war's end. History delivers its verdict not through technical specifications but through results. The Sherman won. The Panther lost. Everything else is commentary. 79 years later, historians and tank enthusiasts still debate the relative merits of German and American armor. These debates often focus on gun penetration tables, armor thickness charts, and kill ratios from individual engagements. But the men who actually fought in these tanks understood a simpler truth. The tank that reaches the battlefield, fights reliably, and can be replaced when destroyed is more valuable than the tank with impressive specifications that breaks down before engaging the enemy. American tankers in 76mm Shermans firing HVAP ammunition at German Panthers weren't trying to prove American technical superiority. They were simply doing their jobs, fighting effectively with the weapons provided, within a system designed to support them, toward the objective of winning the war. They succeeded because the system worked, not because individual American tanks were better than individual German tanks. German tankers who learned to respect the Sherman, often too late, were acknowledging not just that American guns had improved, but that their entire concept of armored warfare had been flawed. Technical superiority at the tactical level could not compensate for systemic failure at the operational and strategic levels. The best tank in the world was useless if it couldn't reach the battle, couldn't be sustained in combat, and couldn't be replaced when lost. This lesson resonates far beyond World War II. In any technological competition, sustainable adequacy defeats unsustainable excellence every time, without exception. The German tankers, who called Shermans tin cans until 76mm rounds pierced their armor, learned this lesson through bitter experience. Their initial contempt gave way to grudging respect, then to the understanding that they had been wrong about what actually mattered in armored warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.